Quran or in the Torah or some other holy book, these were the conclusions. And now you presented or built an argument about why those conclusions were good conclusions, etc. So you had already decided the conclusions before you had looked at the evidence and so on. So Bertrand Russell and many others in the rationalist school argued that, you know, these the people who had been writing from a religious point of view could not properly speaking be considered either philosophers or considered, you know, political philosophers or thinkers, etc. I'm noticing some of you are having a very nice relaxing time, but you are in a class, my friend, so I'd appreciate if you could take out your notebook and you know, take out your pen and take notes with while I speak. And not on your telephone, by the way, on a piece of paper. Okay. Telephone notes are terrible. You'll never remember them. They'll be lost in the telephone somewhere or the other. I want you to have your own separate notebook for my course in which you take your notes. It will be very important for your midterm exam as well as for your final exam. It will be primarily from your own notes that you're going to be studying and understanding. And today, while I permit you to use a piece of paper, in the future I want to see you with a notebook.
Sir, a friend of mine had to bring it in the class if he hasn't come yet.
ये क्या बात है? अगर मैं ये तो बड़ी अजीब सी बात है तुम्हारे दोस्त के पास तुम्हारी नोटबुक कर रही है
फिर उसमें एक और कोर्स भी है उसने उसका काम करना था
चीटिंग कर रहा था वो Please keep your own notebooks in handy, and I expect you to have them when you come to class. And secondly, please, we've tried to get you the reading package from Canotech, etc., but we haven't managed so far. So I'm going to rely on you now to go and get your reading package. So the third wave classes, we're doing 10 philosophers. We're on the third one already, and most of you have not done any reading from Plato and Aristotle. And I need you all to be in touch with the readings, because the midterm and final exam basically come from the readings. They don't come from the lectures, they come from the readings. So a lot of people make this mistake of thinking it's the lectures from me. But in the lectures I weave in and out of many, many different subjects and topics. It's the readings that will focus you. जब मैं exam बनाता हूँ तो मैं reading से exam बनाता हूँ. So that's what you have to focus on if you want to get a good grade. Get your reading package and start doing the readings before class. Okay, so as I was saying, कि ये पूरी history, पूरे 1000 साल की history जो है हम skip over करते हैं in conventional courses. I don't think this is a very good idea, because I feel that despite the differences in methodology between political scientists and religious scholars, that religious scholars tend not to move from their conclusions. Despite that, I think that there is a lot of wisdom and knowledge to be offered by many of these scholars that deserve mention, deserve to be looked at. Two of the big philosophers in Christian theology are St. Thomas Aquinas and St. Augustine, and in Muslim philosophy are Ibn Sina, Al-Farabi, Al-Kindi, Al-Ghazali, Ibn Rushd, etc. These are some of the great names of the medieval period, and I think they've contributed enormously to our understanding of society and therefore deserve to be understood, etc. Nonetheless, one very important factor that did develop as a result of the development of monotheistic religion is that people began to examine politics from the point of view of what is right and wrong. In fact, they examined economics, politics, society, everything from the point of view of what is right and wrong. And what is right and wrong was also always obviously determined by religion. So they stopped looking at what was happening, as you know, and trying to understand what was going on, and started looking at it from a moralistic point of view of what ought to happen. So while that can be a useful exercise, it doesn't to say that something ought to happen. For example, people ought to tell the truth, people ought not to cheat on their taxes or run the red light, or people ought not to kill other people or so on, or rape innocent children and kill them. It's not wrong to expect that people ought not to commit crimes and do evil things, but it doesn't help to explain why crimes do occur. Why do bad things occur? And if we don't understand why bad things occur, then we can't fix them. We can condemn them. But condemning things is not enough from a scientific point of view. If you want to fix things, then you also have to understand why things go wrong. So for example, if I want to understand why students cheat, if I want to prevent students from cheating, one thing is that I can sort of, condemn it all the time. I can come to class and say cheating is very bad and so on and so forth. But you'll see that no matter how many times I come to class and I say cheating is very bad, cheating will go down only very marginally. But if I understand why is it that students cheat, what incentivizes them to cheat, and I change that which incentivizes them to cheat, etc., then I see that I can achieve much better results. For example, to have a better system of academic honesty, etc., will always mean that students who cheat will not be more successful than students who don't cheat. So that's the number one thing that will disincentivize cheating, right? So for example, बहुत सारे government schools वगैरह में ऐसे होता है कि people get away with cheating all the time, and you know it about each other. कि हाँ यार उसने बूटी बनाई, उसने ये इतने नंबर ले लिए, उसने ये किया, उसने बाथरूम के अंदर कोर्स पैक छुपाया हुआ था, फिर उसने कहा कि मैंने टॉयलेट जाना, उसने जाके सारे आंसर पढ़ के, उसने नीचे फोन रखा हुआ था, वैसे विकिपीडिया से कॉपी कर रहा था वगैरह वगैरह. I know all the tricks because I've been a student. So if it becomes public knowledge that cheating pays, crime pays, then everybody says कि यार वो भी कर रहा है तो मैं क्यों ना करूँ. ठीक है? So for example, why do people not break lines at the Dubai airport but break them all the time in the Pakistan airport? Because in the Dubai airport, if you break a line, somebody or the other comes and catches up to you and says get back in line. थोड़ी सी बेइज्जती भी आपकी होती है, सब आपको ढूंढते भी हैं कि क्या करना था वगैरह. So you get back in line. It doesn't pay actually to cut the line. But when you see कि यार 10 लोगों ने लाइन तोड़ दी है, उनको कुछ भी नहीं हुआ, बल्कि जो आगे वाला बंदा है उसने कहा जी पासपोर्ट लाइन ठीक है कर देता हूँ. लेकिन जब आप अगर वो जो वहाँ बंदा खड़ा हुआ है, अगर वो कहे सॉरी सर आपने लाइन तोड़ी है, मैं आपको नहीं उनको पहले देखूंगा, तो फिर देखें आप कोई भी लाइन नहीं तोड़ेगा. एक दो मैं वीज़ा लेने जा रहा था फॉर माई मास्टर्स डिग्री, तो हम यहाँ लंदन जो यूके की एम्बेसी है ना वहाँ इस्लामाबाद पहुँचे. तो पहले दिन हम पहुँचे, इतनी लंबी लाइन थी कि हमारी बारी नहीं. दूसरे दिन हम उससे भी सुबह पहुँचे, फिर भी इतनी लंबी लाइन थी, बारी नहीं. फिर तीसरे दिन हमने ये किया कि हमने किसी बंदे को पैसे दिए कि तुम लाइन में खड़े हो सुबह 4 बजे से. वो सुबह 4 बजे लाइन में खड़ा हो गया और हम कोई मतलब 7-8 बजे पहुँचे और हम उसकी जगह पे खड़े हो गए. जब उन्होंने दरवाजे खोले तो सारों ने रश किया ना गेट की तरफ. जब सारों ने रश किया, एक मतलब भगदड़ मच गई. वो पहाड़ के ऊपर होता था उस वक्त उनकी एम्बेसी थोड़ी सी ना लाइक इट वाज ऑन एन इंक्लाइन. ऊपर भाग रहे हैं, कोई इधर गिर रहा है, किसी के पेपर्स उड़ रहे हैं, किसी की चेन गायब हो गई है, कह रहे हैं मेरी चेन गुम गई वगैरह. Chaotic. So that day the British embassy, when they saw the scene, they just said हमने आज वीजा नहीं देना, सब दफा सब घर चले जाए, हमने देना ही किसी को नहीं देना. जो लाइन में खड़ा है नहीं खड़ा, we don't give a damn, we're not giving anybody any. अगले दिन ऐसी सीधी लाइन खड़ी हुई थी, एक बंदे ने लाइन नहीं तोड़ी लाइन, क्योंकि अकल आ गई ना कि अगर तोड़ेंगे तो किसी को भी नहीं फायदा मिलेगा, वो कुछ भी होगा, तो फिर सारे सीधे हो गए. तो ये कुछ चीज़, ये एक चीज़ है. मगर मैं आपको और कई सारी मिसालें दे सकता हूँ कि what is the value system that we build in any given context. I mean, for example, अगर हम value system ये बनाएं कि ग्रेड लेना ही और उसमें ग्रेड हाई लेना ही सबसे इम्पोर्टेंट चीज़ है, तो हम इंसेंटिवाइज करते हैं आपको टू गेट अ हाई ग्रेड, राइट. मगर हम इंसेंटिवाइज हाई ग्रेड को कर रहे हैं, हाई लेवल ऑफ लर्निंग को नहीं कर रहे. और जब आप हाई ग्रेड को इंसेंटिवाइज करेंगे एज अपोज टू लर्निंग को इंसेंटिवाइज किया जाए, तो फिर उसका भी रिजल्ट ये होगा कि लर्निंग हो या ना हो, what are you incentivizing? The grade. So then you're going to find ways to maximize your grade. You're going to manage your time in accordance with what really gives you a better grade. So you'll choose your classes not in accordance with your interest, but आपको पता होगा अच्छा ये सब रहमान है, ये बड़ा मुश्किल ग्रेड देते हैं, ये मैडम राबिया से आ जाए, ये आसानी से ग्रेड दे देते हैं, तो उनके साथ क्लास लेते हैं. मगर not that it happens that way. हाँ? What's fine? नहीं यार, I believe it's a practical example. Rabia is my friend, that's why I can take her name. अगर वो मेरा दोस्त ना हो तो उसका नाम ना लूँ. So and I'm not so sure that she's an easier grader than I am either. I just made that up. But you see the point, right? A lot of students do that. They, in fact, you make your whole career at LUMS in accordance with certain principles. For example, आप कहते हैं पहले साल तो चलो थोड़ी सी रैगिंग से बचते रहना है, दूसरे साल खूब मेहनत करेंगे, that's the hardest year apparently, तीसरे साल भी खूब मेहनत करेंगे, और चौथे साल what are we going to do? P-A-R-T-Y. You know why? Because I want to. Isn't that the way you guys think, right? I mean, 4th year nobody studies anything. You become a senior, you go sit with your legs crossed like this in the back. You know, you're like, man, I'm so cool already. I can teach the teacher. I need to learn and stuff, right? I know. और पूरा महीना तो आप लोग महीना नहीं, पता नहीं 2-2.5 महीने तो आप लोग पता नहीं कभी कलर वीक और फिर यो वीक और फिर डाकू डे और फिर वाला डे. वाटर डे क्या क्या दिन आप मनाते रहते हैं, सारा वो जो टर्म होती है ना उसमें कोई ना मैं पढ़ाई कर सकता हूँ ना आप लोग पढ़ाई करते हैं. तो that's how you build it, right? I mean, because we've incentivized things in a certain way, and maybe that's not the best way for us to to teach you or to discuss these things, etc. So if we were in a situation where the value system was not what grade you get, but what learning you do, then you see very big changes. I got a shocker, when I went to the United States to study, and I was at Grinnell College, very small liberal arts college. Classes भी बड़ी छोटी-छोटी होती थी, 12-12 लोगों की, 15-15 लोगों की. तो पहले ही मैं अपने इम्तिहान में बैठा हुआ था, और टीचर ने इम्तिहान वगैरह दिया, हम कोई 15 बच्चे होंगे, और टीचर ने इम्तिहान दे के, horror of all horrors, टीचर ने इम्तिहान दे के उसने कहा अच्छा मैं अपने ऑफिस जा रही हूँ, 2 घंटे बाद मैं आऊँगी इम्तिहान देने. That's what I mean. And here I am, imagine, from Lahore, Pakistan, एक जो से कॉलेज से पढ़ा हुआ लड़का है, जिसने सारी जिंदगी देखा है, सारी जिंदगी हमने ये देखा था, मैं ही तो देखूं क्या हो रहा है. और कसम खुदा की what shocked me was, nobody batted an eyelid, nobody said wait, इसका जवाब क्या? किसी ने नाम मुझसे जब पूछा, मैं तड़प रहा था कि पूछे मुझसे, कोई मैं किसी से पूछूं कुछ तो हो, कुछ तो टेंशन हो, पाए एक दूसरे को देखने की. What shocking experience of my life. So that's why I think, to come back to my original point, I think it's very important for us to make an analysis of what is going on in society, to understand things in order to change them, rather than just to condemn them all the time and say, bada pura, bada pura, bada pura. And that, I think, is where I would like to bring back Niccolo Machiavelli, one of the, or rather, introduce me to Niccolo Machiavelli. Now, Machiavelli is the product of, and also creates a unique period in European history, which is called the Renaissance, which of course means, what does it mean? Rebirth, exactly. Why is it called the rebirth? This is very interesting. First of all, let's just get a broad outline of what it was. It began in the 14th century and lasted 3 centuries, from the 1300s to the 1600s. And it was considered the rebirth of Europe. It was a cultural rebirth. It was a period of extraordinary creativity, innovation, imagination. It was, and of course, it is you can say it's what we call the pre-modern period. इसके बाद जो period है, 15th and 16th century, certainly the 16th century is what we call the modern period of history. So medieval period comes to an end, modern period begins in the 16th century. This is the transition. How Europe moved from its medieval period to its modern period. It is also called the end of the Dark Ages and a new foundation for Europe. And the abiding principle about this period was that Europe fell completely in love with Greek civilization, with Greek and Roman civilization. Now, why is this funny or confusing? We need to know a little bit about European history to understand what's going on over here. You see, at the time that Plato and Aristotle were writing, Greeks was very small city-states. They were nothing in comparison to the massive empires that existed in the East, specifically the Persian Empire and so on, which also tried to conquer the Greeks. The Greeks then, who had been fighting with each other, finally managed in one way or another to unite and to push back the Persians. And then a Macedonian amongst them arose, and he was a brilliant, very young commander. His name was Alexander, and he fought the Persians, and he fought them all the way across that huge, massive kingdom, going also into Egypt, into the south, and coming right back up north across, Iraq, and then across Iran, and then across Afghanistan, and then all the way up to the Indus over here in Jhelum. And then he went down the river, stopped in Multan for a cup of tea. I'm kidding. He had a big battle in Multan where he was shot in the chest with an arrow, which was also poisoned, because he was very brave. So they were trying to take a castle, और वो castle take over नहीं हो रहा था, तो Alexander ने कहा पीछे हटो, मोहल्ला जाट की तरह खुद ही वो पौड़ी पे चढ़ गया ऊपर. He used to do that quite often in many battles. That's why people, his soldiers really loved him. Everybody else hated him, The people he conquered hated him. The Persians hate him. Even if you ask, the Iranians what they think of Alexander, they'll tell you he's the devil. Hum, of course, we don't really hate him too much. That's why we name our children after him. Anybody here called Sikandar? Okay, no, Sikandar's here. But Sikandar is the local name for Alexander, right? So we have lots of people who are called Sikandar. But if you went to Iran and you said, I'm Sikandar, they'd be like, go away. No, I'm just joking. But anyway, you'll find very few Iranians who are going to be named Sikandar, that's for sure. Anyway, so he went down to Multan, he got shot in the way, etc. He got a bit sick, but that didn't matter. Then he went all the way back. और फिर नीचे गया मुकरान कोस्ट पे वहाँ घूमता घूमता चलता चलता कुछ उसने कश्तियों से भेज दिया फिर वहाँ से इस्फहान पहुँचा which is Iran where he married an Iranian princess etc. which was horror of horror for the Greeks because Plato and Aristotle के ज़माने में तो लोग ये कहते थे कि Greek से बेहतर तो कोई है नहीं ये तो barbarians है सारे. But Alexander thought very differently. And one other thing that he did which was really shocking was कि for the West at that time was कि आपको पता है ना कि वहाँ ग्रीक्स वगैरह जो थे वो तो फ्रॉक पहनते थे ना पता है ना आपको टोगा शोगा पहनते थे फ्रॉक पहनते थे जो पर्शियंस थे ना they were the first ones to wear a leg garment that had two legs in it okay so pants jeans etc and all your pants they were not invented by the West we think we're very some westernized we're wearing pants etc pants were in fact invented by the Persians. We were wearing pants and shalwars and other things like that, long before anybody else. And when the Greeks discovered that Alexander was wearing pants, they're like, oh my god, it's a kudi body. So unmanly to be wearing this sort of strange dress that the Persians wear in anyway. So, and it's from the Persians, in fact, that the Greeks took back the concept of pants and then it slowly spread into the West. And then it spread into America in the form of denim. And from there, from MTV, it came back to us and we started wearing pants. Look how American I am. Not realizing that in fact you're being Persian as well. So nice little story there. But the point is, yes.
So once you said that Alexander was a student of Plato, I think?
Aristotle.
So he had different views from in the sense that they thought that Greeks were greater civilization as compared to the others?
You see, Alexander, I think, was in the unique position that he got to see the other races firsthand. Aristotle didn't really travel very much. Plato did. He traveled a lot. But Alexander went deep into Persia, all the way to India. And I think as he fought his way through, he started with a very, you could say racist view. But I think his journey also showed to him how noble, even in opposition, others were. So you must have heard of that very famous story of the battle between Alexander and the king of Punjab, Porus. Have you heard of that? Okay, so Porus was a great king of the Punjab, huge man, very, very well built, etc. And he fought Alexander really very well and extremely superb. In fact, when Alexander's troops had never seen elephants in battle. And so when Porus brought his elephants out and these war elephants charged the Greek troops, they had to do laundry. Really, they were terrified of elephants. They had never seen an animal of this sort, let alone have to fight one. And so Alexander's troops had a very hard time fighting Porus. In fact, now some historians, the classic version is that, the classic tale narrative is that Porus came to Alexander after he lost and said to Alexander, Alexander said to him, what are your, how should you be treated, maybe how should you be treated, tell me. So he said, Porus very proudly stood up. He was also wounded, etc. But he very proudly stood up and said, you should treat me as a king treats another king. So the classic tale is that Alexander was so impressed by his response, his bravery, his nobility, even in defeat, that he said, I'm going to give you back your kingdom. I'm going south. So that's the classic tale. But the revisionist tale, the new understanding is that in fact, Porus and Alexander fought each other to a standstill. And Alexander's troops refused to march further because they had just entered Punjab. All of India lay before with massive, massive troops because Indian armies at that time were enormous, you know, I mean, they were in tens of thousands, sometimes in hundreds of thousands, right? So, they would have had to fight the Mauryan Empire, Chandragupta Maurya, etc. And these were very powerful empires. So, the revisionist view is that in fact they fought each other to a standstill, and Alexander's troops refused to fight Indians any further because they said they're too warlike and we will have too many losses if we want to go back to peace. So that's why Alexander had to withdraw. So you could say that in fact the Punjab did defeat Alexander, if you look at the revisionist point. There's both points of view. But what was the question? What was the question I was originally answering? Yes, so that's why I think if I read into Alexander, what I see is that he developed a respect for Persians and for Afghans and for Punjabis and so on and so forth, that these were completely alien races to him. But when he got to see them firsthand, I think it changed his views, especially Alexander's views, not so much his generals' views. And that's why I think in many instances you see Alexander saying to his generals and his troops, okay, why don't you marry Persian women? We're going to settle in Isfahan. We're going to make this the capital now. We're not going back all the way to Macedonia. He didn't want to go back to Macedonia. He died in Iran. So he actually thought, ke, yaar, wo to pind se nikle the, look at this amazing empire with, you know, literature and books and art and architecture and brave and noble people. I think it began to change his views. Anyway, so that was it. And a lot of some of the opposition to Alexander was precise within his own troops, etc., was precisely on the grounds that Alexander is becoming too Persian. Alexander is becoming too Persian. He's being influenced by Persian culture and Persian ideas. Of course, both civilizations influenced each other enormously. Greek became the language then of philosophy and science, became one of the dominant languages in what is really the Mediterranean world and the Middle East, etc., which was really the heart of Western philosophy, you know, the story that I'm telling you at least. And after the Greeks then split into three different empires, the Ptolemaic Empire, etc., the Macedonian Empire and so on. And eventually the Greek Empire was taken over by the Romans. The Romans were extremely successful. They were the most successful empire, arguably in history. The Western Roman Empire continued for 1,000 years, almost without interruption, and while it dominated for 1,000 years, there was no other force to match the strength of the Roman Empire. Really, for 1,000 years they could easily dominate all their enemies. If at any time Roman armies were defeated, they were defeated owing to civil wars rather than to outside forces, etc. The Roman Empire then split into two parts, the Western Roman Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire. The Western Roman Empire then collapsed, and the Eastern Roman Empire continued as the Byzantine Empire, which, if you know your history, the Muslims then fought and defeated, etc. The Arabs, rather, the Byzantine Empire continued its fight with the Persian Empire, and they mutually exhausted each other, and that's when Islam swept the Arabian Peninsula and then swept the Persian Empire and also defeated the Byzantine Empire. So, and as well. So it was the mutual exhaustion of these two big empires which allowed the Arabs to rise dramatically between the 7th century and the 9th, 10th century. But I was going to tell you the story of Rome. Rome, in its 1,000 years of rule, became also an incredibly oppressive state. It was a terribly oppressive state. Nobody could defeat it. It was way too strong. It would tax the crap out of people. Please censor that. It would tax people to their bone, and it could be quite brutal with its enemies. One of the symbols of the Roman Empire, if anybody revolted against the empire, do you know what the Romans did to anybody who was considered a traitor, committed treason? What did they do? What was their worst punishment? What was their worst punishment?
Was it hanged and quartered?
No, that was the English. Yes, it was crucifixion. Long before Jesus Christ was crucified, the Romans had been practicing crucifixion for many centuries. In fact, one of the great slave revolts was by a man named Spartacus, I don't know, how many of you heard of Spartacus? Okay. So all your gladiator stories, movies, are based on an actual person who was a historical figure, great figure, who was a gladiator from Thrace, which is now in Bulgaria. And he organized with 72 of his gladiator friends the largest revolt that Rome had ever seen. And he actually managed to defeat Roman armies till he was betrayed by, he could have actually sacked Rome. He could have taken Rome, the capital itself. But he wanted nothing to do with Rome. He believed Rome was a symbol of slavery. So he tried to flee Italy. He got the help of some pirates and merchants, etc., who betrayed him. He got caught on the coast and he got defeated. And when he was defeated, the Romans took 6,000 of his followers and they put up crosses from Capua all the way to Rome and at an equal distance, and they crucified 6,000 people of his followers. They never actually could identify who Spartacus was, because when they tried to find out, everybody said, I'm Spartacus. So they said, all right, sab koi maar. So crucifixion was a symbol of the most cruel punishment that the Romans gave anybody who revolted against their empire. But there were many revolts despite their cruelty against the empire. A series of revolts that occurred in the Middle East was led by people who subscribed to the Jewish faith. They were also, just as all the other peoples of under the Roman Empire were being oppressed and quashed by the Romans, so too were the Semites, the Jews of the Middle East. And they found many of their champions who fought. Some of them fought guerrilla wars, some of them led movements, etc. And one of their champions was, of course, Jesus of Nazareth, who was a preacher from a very humble background, from a small town called Nazareth. He came to Jerusalem and he started his preaching. He was, we find this a strange thing because we associate Jesus with Christianity and Judaism and Yahudi ko hum alada dekhte hain, Christians ko hum alada dekhte hain. But Jesus identified himself as a Jew. Jesus was a Jew. When Jesus was crucified, they put a what do you call it? Taj ko kya kehte hain? Crown. Yes, a crown of thorns on his head, and they mockingly called him the King of the Jews, etc., etc. So Jesus led an incredible rebellion basically against the Roman Empire. That's what we suppose. So if Moses led a great rebellion against the pharaohs of his time, Jesus led a great rebellion against the Roman Empire, the biggest empire that existed in his time. And we won't speak about the differences between early Christianity and late Christianity, but there are fascinating books on the subject of how then Christianity, when early Christianity was defeated, Jesus' revolt was defeated, it was crushed, etc., how it then slowly spread into the very heartland of the people that he was opposing. Initially, Jesus' message was basically of reform of Judaism, but as it spread into the Gentile population, into the Romans, it changed in time. It began to change. It began to change primarily under St. Paul. And as the message of Jesus spread into the Roman Empire itself, and it spread amongst the slaves and against the oppressed within the Roman Empire, as it spread over there, it took on many characteristics that were, many ideas that were in the culture of Rome at that time. So it became a new synthesis of Roman ideas and Oriental ideas and Judaic ideas and even Egyptian ideas and so on. So now, when the Roman Empire finally collapsed under the assault of the barbarians, the people that Romans called barbarians, it was the Germans, etc., the Goths and the Visigoths and so on, and the Ostrogoths, etc. When it finally collapsed, the Christians who had been persecuted in Rome and been, oppressed under Rome, can't say celebrated, but certainly breathed a sigh of relief that this horrible empire that had crushed them for so many centuries was finally finished. So you can understand, therefore, why it was that as Europe developed under the Catholic Church and under Christianity, it came to hate all that Rome symbolized. Although it also synthesized much of what, it was also deeply influenced by Rome, in a, you could say, without realizing it, you know. But at the same time, there was an antipathy towards Rome. They wanted to forget that history. They didn't want to glorify Julius Caesar and talk about, you know, Augustus and all of these other, Octavius and all of these other whatever people. They looked at Nero not as a hero but as zero. They looked at Caligula as a horrible, you know, sex maniac and so on, right? They looked at Rome as a whole as a place of sin, and they called it famously under Saint what's his name, Augustine. They called it the city of evil. They considered it, you know, a place of great, not just sin, but oppression and so on. So now, for 1,000 years, since the breakup of, since the Western Roman Empire's collapse, they had more or less forgotten about this whole story about what the Greeks were doing and what the Romans were doing. And then something changed. And what changed was that a remarkable prophet of the Arabs, you know who I'm talking about, Hazrat Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam, led an incredible revolt that united the Arabs, defeated not just the Persian Empire, but also defeated, and this is even more important, also defeated the Eastern Roman Empire, which had survived another 1,000 bloody years. It had survived till 1450 something, 3 or 7 or whatever. So they finally defeated the Byzantine Empire. And when they finally, in the 15th century, you know, they were fighting it. So when they were fighting it, they finally defeated they took Constantinople, in fact, in the 15th century, but they had defeated many other regions of the Byzantine Empire much before that. So as they defeated that, what happened was, two things happened. One was that many of the people who were sitting in the Byzantine Empire, who spoke Greek, by the way, because their official language was Greek, and their church is still called the Greek Orthodox Church. It's the same church that exists in Russia. So the Russian church and the Byzantine church is the same. It's the Greek Orthodox Church, also called Eastern Christianity, okay, which is very different from Western Christianity. So Eastern Christianity was the repository of much of the work of people like Plato and the Neoplatonists, especially Plotinus and so on. Now these, and also not just that, but Homer and all the great Greek sort of works of art and literature, etc., were really there in the Eastern Roman Empire. Now as these intellectuals fled, when the Muslims came, when Islam came, many intellectuals obviously fled. They said, oh, यहाँ तो infidels आ गए तो हम कहीं चलते हैं. तो वो जब भागे तो where did they come? They didn't go to all the way west. They came to Italy. Why did they come to Italy? A lot of them came to Italy. Why did they come to Italy specifically? They came to Italy because Italy at that time was broken into 5 different small republics. छोटे-छोटे states बने हुए थे. और क्योंकि वो छोटे-छोटे states थे, बड़े-बड़े states नहीं थे, तो वहाँ पे merchants बड़े strong थे, क्योंकि Italy was did a lot of Mediterranean trade. So there was a lot of azadi over there for them to, if they had gone to the Western Roman Empire, तो वो जो कि पुरानी लड़ाई थी Greek Orthodox और Catholics की जो लड़ाई थी, वो दोबारा शुरू हो जाती. तो ये middle में जगह थी कि जहाँ पे they felt कि there was enough freedom of speech कि they came in huge numbers they came. And the second interesting change is that when in Arabia, you know that when the Khulafai Rashidun ka period khatam hua, so what was created after that was a Badshahat, and this Badshahat was called the Umayyad Dynasty, which lasted for about 100 years, and I think 90 in fact, so about a century. And then it was finally defeated by a Persian Arab wave, which was called the Abbasid dynasty in 750. But as the Umayyads were defeated in Arabia itself, they made their way, one of the princes made his way, Abdul Rahman, back to Spain, which had already been conquered, and he set up a Khilafat over there. So the Spanish Khilafat that we take so much pride in is actually the continuation of the Umayyad dynasty. And in Arabia itself, the Abbasids had come to power, so they didn't get along with each other anymore. Complex and interesting history. Now, as the Umayyads went from Arabia all the way there, they took much of, they also took much of the Arab literature that had developed at the time, and many intellectuals that were associated with them. And the other interesting thing that happened was that if there was any persecution in Arabia, people from Arabia would say, okay, ji, chalo, theek hai, fir main Spain chalega ji. And if there was any persecution in Spain, they say, theek hai ji, fir main Baghdad chalega ji. Thank you. You know, ये होता है ना, empires के दरमियान होता है. तो many, so Arabia के अंदर भी एक conservative, पहले तो एक बड़ी progressive wave थी, 9th century से तकरीबन 13th century तक huge progressive wave, बड़ी science में तरक्की, philosophy, ये वो फलां. अच्छा वो क्या हो क्या रहा था वहाँ पे? वो ये रहा था कि एक बड़ा smart किस्म का सुल्तान आया, he was an Abbasi sultan. His name was Harun al-Rashid. Anybody heard of him? Okay, very intelligent administrator, very cruel as well, because all administrators at that time were pretty bloody cruel. Could be very cruel, but also very, very smart as a politician and as a head of state. उसने ये कहा कि जी हमने अपनी उसने Renaissance का लफ्ज़ तो नहीं इस्तेमाल किया, मगर basically that was his idea was that the Arabs are very backward people compared to the Persians and compared to the Romans. It was true. And we have to become the most advanced people in the world. And how do we do that? We're going to do that by basically taking all the literature of the world that we can find and translating it first and foremost into Arabic. So he got in touch with this guy called Mr. Kindi. And he said, Mr. Kindi, hi, how are you? No, that's not what happened. And he set up in Baghdad, he set up a new capital in Baghdad because he didn't want to basically have his capital in Makkah or Medina anymore. They set up a new capital in Baghdad where they said, we're going to set up a special university of kind. It was called the House of Wisdom. And where you will be in charge, you will be the Vice Chancellor, Mr. Al-Kindi. And what I want you to do is I want you to translate everything you can find. And anybody who goes from one side of Arabia to the other, any merchant who comes to our port, if they have any book, you give them उस किताब की का जो weight है ना, उस weight की तुमने gold उसको दे देना, वो किताब तुमने या तो रख लेनी है या उसकी कॉपी बना. कोई किताब ना हमारे पोर्ट से इधर से उधर जाए, हर किताब translate किया. It was a remarkable state-led initiative to change Arab culture, and it was successful. They translated Aristotle, they translated Plato, they translated, everything they could find. And it was remarkably successful. And all the great scientists that you hear about, Ibn Shamil, Ibn Sina, they are a product of that state-led initiative to change Arab culture. But by the 13th century, two very important changes occurred, 13th and 14th century. आप बोर हो रहे हैं? सो रहे हैं? सुनो यार, तुम्हारी अपनी तारीख है, तो हमारी सबकी एक मुश्तरका तारीख है. 13th, 14th century में दो changes हुए. एक तो कमबख्त पागल मंगोलियंस जो थे ना, मंगोलियंस ने बड़ा मसला खराब किया. सारे दुनिया के मुल्कों के लिए बड़ा मसला खराब. अब तो मंगोलिया को जाना ही नहीं चाहता, मगर मंगोलियंस जो थे ना, बड़ी यूनिक किस्म के लोग, क्योंकि ये रहते थे एक ऐसे जगह में कि जहाँ पे घोड़े हों. तो बचपन से ना, जब छोटे 3 साल के बच्चे होते थे ना, ये घोड़े पे चढ़ जाते थे. And they were the best riders, they had the best horses, they were the best riders that you could find in the world. And and they were a pastoralist people. They had no cities. They used to live in bloody tents. And they worshipped the sky, that they call Tengri. Anyway, so Mongolians loved to fight, and they were always constantly fighting with each other. And by fighting with each other, they perfected the art of warfare. And then finally they united. And they united under Genghis Khan, and then they said, okay, here we go. And then they swept the east, they swept China, जहाँ पे उन्होंने फिर अपनी एक Chinese dynasty बनाई, which was Kublai Khan, and they swept Asia, and they came all the way down to Arabia, where they swept over Arabia, the Muslim areas, and they sacked Baghdad, and they said, yeah, what is this nonsense, you with your fine carpets and your golden cups and whatever, and your books and your flana and your libraries, sab jala do. Libraries unne jala di, जो बड़े-बड़े वहाँ के rulers थे, उनको उनके carpets के अंदर बंद करके ना, roll करके, but उन्होंने कहा अपने घोड़े इसके ऊपर से दौड़ा दो, ऊपर से घोड़े दौड़ा दिए, उन्होंने वो जो उनके गोल्ड के सब खूबसूरत खूबसूरत बर्तन थे, उनको मेल्ट करके बढ़िया करते थे, वो एक पिला देते थे आपको, ये लो गोल्ड, मोल्टन गोल्ड पियो, बंदे मर जाते थे, कहते थे यार इट्स प्रीटी हॉट ड्रिंक. They had this thing called Rakse Bismil, in which, am I getting to like, okay, you watch Winter is Coming, so you're used to these sort of things now. एक क्या चीज करते थे, बंदा उठाते थे, कुर्सी उसको खड़ा करते थे, फिर एक बड़ी सी छोटी सा बंदा आता था, वो यूं करके ना पटाख करके ये जो सर का ऊपर वाला हिस्सा ना खड़क करके चॉप ऑफ कर देता था, और जैसे ही वो चॉप ऑफ करता था ना एक और बंदा उसके सर के ऊपर मोल्टन गोल्ड, तो वो जो बॉडी होती थी उसमें मोल्टन गोल्ड से वो चिपक जाती थी, तो वो बॉडी जो नीचे होती थी क्रेजी उसमें से सिंबल्स जाते थे, और वो ऐसे लगता था जैसे बॉडी डांस कर रही है. That's what they call it. That was the cruel punishments that they gave and the cruel way in which they killed loads and loads of people. बहुत. So that was one major thing, the sack of Baghdad by the Mongols. Achha, but good part is, there's a good, Fashan ho gayi yaar. She's like, why did I take this course? My stomach is churning. But there's a good side to the story. The good side of the story is that once the Mongols came and they settled down in Baghdad and other places, they said, you know, this religion, Islam, it's not really that bad. I like it. They all converted to Islam. And once they converted to Islam, they then set up a new civilization with Mongolian, Arabic synthesis and influences of both. So there's a good story here as well. But they did sadly destroy that upward sort of trend that that was the product of the Abbasids, etc. The other major change was also a conservatism was sweeping over Arabia itself. And this conservatism was, you know, we've been importing Aristotle, we've been importing Plato, we've been importing, talking about Socrates, we've been talking about all these bloody philosophers. None of these philosophers were Muslims. And many of their ideas are totally contrary to the ideas that are present in the Holy Quran. So a conservative wave began to sweep over Arabia, where they began to say that the influence of the Greeks on Muslims, or rather on Arabs as a whole, number one, and also the influence of the Persians on Arabs, and also the influence of the Coptic Christians. Many of the translators, in fact, were Christians and Jews that are in the Allied. These are all foreign influences that are coming into our religion, which is mainly an Arab religion, and we need to get rid of these foreign influences because ye biddat hai Islam. And so there was a huge, also conservative, you could say, pushback against the invasion, as they saw it, the invasion of this foreign culture and many, many foreign ideas into Islam. So these two things coalesced to then change some very important dynamics. One of which was that much of this, you could say, much of this mixture of Greek Islamic thought, or rather Greek Islamic philosophy. Islamic philosophy, you could say, is a mixture of Greek philosophy and Islamic philosophy. Right? Much of this Greek/Islamic inspired philosophy then shifted to Spain, because वहाँ पे, as I said, थोड़ी सी आज़ादी ज़्यादा थी, जो यहाँ खफा होता था वहाँ चला जाता. And वहाँ पे the school that developed, मैंने बड़ा time ले लिया background. I'm on the first slide, अभी तो मैं केवल शुरू नहीं हुआ. Anyway, the person who led this revolt was a man called Ibn Rushd. Okay? He began to write the commentaries of Aristotle. And these commentaries became incredibly important. Because when the Christians began to read what Ibn Rushd was writing, many Christian philosophers said, this guy is right. I mean, he's Muslim, but he's an infidel. Man, philosophically, he is right. And so, बहुत सारे लोग ऐसे पैदा हो गए जो कि Christians थे, मगर इब्न रुश्द को अपना उस्ताद मानते. उसके नतीजे में another, you know, ये अक्सर religions, civilizations के दरमियान competition होता रहता है. You get too influenced by another civilization, then you find somebody who then reverses that or synthesizes it and so on. So a very great philosopher by the name of St. Thomas Aquinas, very concerned, amongst many other things, one of the things he was concerned about was how Averroism was spreading, decided not only to study Aristotle and Empedocles, etc., but to integrate that with Christianity, which he did, remarkably. And so this began a very new rediscovery, you could say, of a process of rediscovery, both from the West, which was coming from the Averroists and St. Thomas Aquinas and so on, as well as from the East, which was coming from the intellectuals that were fleeing Muslim conquest and coming to Italy. And these two big trends merged into Italy, causing amongst the Italians this fever, this passion for this. There was this new craze. It was this new like coolness. And the coolness was, if you wanted to be cool, dude, you had to know your Greek and your Latin, and you had to know who the Greeks were, what their architecture was, what their arts were. So this new fascination with the civilization that the Christians had overcome developed amongst the Christians themselves. They also felt that, and this is very pertinent, they also felt, look at the Arabs, look at the Muslims, they make so much progress. हम किधर फंस गए हैं डार्क एजेस में? हम क्यों नहीं तरक्की कर रहे? जिसमें आज हमारे लोग सोचते हैं, उस ज़माने में वो लोग सोच रहे थे. And so they looked back. They thought, okay, we need to learn. We need to open ourselves up. We need to learn from the Muslims. We need to learn from Aristotle. But more than that, even we need to relearn what we have lost in the Greek and Roman field. This created a new kind of philosophy. This philosophy was called humanism. The philosophy of the Renaissance is humanism. What was humanism? By the way, the Renaissance itself, two very interesting facts. Number one, it was primarily an art movement. Number two, it was started by the church itself, as I told you in the previous class. I'll come back to this in just a bit. What was the philosophy of humanism? Humanism said humans should be the center of our investigation, not God. Allah Ta'ala वो तो हम समझ ही नहीं सकते. वो तो हमारी knowledge से beyond है. ठीक है ना? He knows everything. We are very limited in our knowledge. Why are we trying to understand that which is ununderstandable by the human mind? What we need to start looking at is, what we need to start focusing on is not what is the good afterlife, what is the bad afterlife, what do we need to do in the afterlife, what will happen in the afterlife, and so on, which is all conjecture anyway. What we need to look at is human beings. How is our life like? What are we doing, thinking, etc. This was not necessarily what we would consider today a secular philosophy. It was still within the terrain of religion. And this idea that man is at the center, by man I mean human beings, this idea that man was at the center had to somehow be propagated amongst the people. This new philosophy, लोगों तक पहुंचानी थी. अब internet open. You couldn't put a nice little tweet and say, I'm a humanist, what do you? You couldn't make a joke about it or make a meme about it. अखबार होते नहीं थे, रेडियो होता नहीं था. So how did you communicate ideas to the masses? One way, of course, was that you spoke. Right? You would say, hey, hello, this is what I think. But the other incredible way, the main method of mass communication of ideas in that time period was art. Art and architecture. Because people came, they looked at buildings, they looked at paintings, they looked at statues, and what did the statues? The statues gave them some message. And that's how they understood what humanism was. So, Florence and Venice abandoned medieval feudalism to create plutocracies where commerce and science began to flourish, and this slowly spread across Europe in the 15th century. The first, perhaps, Renaissance philosopher was Niccolo Machiavelli himself. His philosophy marked a definitive movement away from theology towards science. What was the spirit of the Renaissance? It was a spirit of creativity. It was a change in politics, society, economics, culture, everything. It was a completely new worldview, very open-minded, progressive, new attitude towards culture, learning. No longer कि ये Christian नहीं है, इसको नहीं पढ़ना, जो भी है उसको पढ़ना है. Individual achievement became very important. So the Renaissance man was one who who was a master of many things and strived for individual achievement. There was a spirit of adventure. Columbus is very much a product of the Renaissance culture. Copernicus and Kepler and Bruno and so many others, they're all products of the Renaissance culture. What were the reasons कि Italy में ये क्यों हुआ? Well, first of all, Italy was dominated by merchants, which means they were not dominated by the old feudal landed class. So the merchants cared. What did the merchants care about? They didn't care about doctrine. They cared about money, right? And so if something was trendy, making money, they said, fine, we don't care. This is good. Secondly, the structure of the Italian states. It was not one big empire, it was many city-states. The Black Death across Europe caused a huge population decline, which also meant that labor suddenly became, and skilled labor and skilled people suddenly became very high in demand. So वो पुरानी repression कुछ कम हो गई, because when labor is in short supply, then you really need skilled labor. So इतनी repression भी नहीं होती. Strange results of a very tragic, sort of the results of the bubonic plague. So they began to rediscover Greek literature, and of course the Italians were primarily, could not help but be interested in Rome, which was their own history. Even the Italians had forgotten about what a great history they had. So suddenly they began to say, oh my God, ये जो aqueduct है, ये कितनी amazing चीज़ है. ये जो cathedral कह रहा हूँ, ये जो stadium वगैरह है, ये कितनी amazing चीज़ है. So this began a revolution which was encapsulated in the arts first and foremost, the Renaissance arts. They studied Greek and Roman works and began to revive the classical form. They wanted to copy how the Greeks did art, how the Greeks did architecture. And the Greeks had a very specific notion about art and architecture, very much derived from the philosophy of Plato and others, that art was supposed to reflect what? Knowledge, truth, beauty, perfection. Art was supposed to, the material world was not perfect, but art had to reflect that which was perfect, abstracted from the material world, as Plato said. Art had to reflect the ideal form. So if you draw a man, you don't draw a real man with a tip coming out and sort of slouching, etc. When you draw a man, you draw him in the best possible way. Or you draw a woman, you draw a woman in the most beautiful possible way. So they really, really reveled in, not in realism, but in classical beauty. So the Renaissance artists began to copy that. A new technique developed, which was perspective and 3D. So you'll be shocked to discover that a lot of medieval art, जो दूर चीज़ है और जो करीब चीज़ है वो एक ही size की होती है, which is so dumb if you think about it now. But then they began to discover that you can make perspective drawings, and they actually learned how to use perspective. I think the Arabs played a very important role in this. So pencil की technique नहीं होती, आपने कभी pencil की technique use की है? कोई किसी ने art पढ़ी कभी? So one technique they teach us is that if I want to make that darwaza, so I'll take the measure of that with my pen like this, and I'll make the darwaza this size. And then if I want to make your face, I'll make the measure of your face like this, and I'll draw it over here. And therefore, जो मैं eye से देख रहा हूँ, the proportion of that door to your face will be exactly the proportion in which I see that. So that's perspective, right? So they developed the idea of perspective, and this began to change art completely. You got three of the great European classical artists of the Renaissance: Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael. Of course, they also had almost a rivalry between themselves. Raphael in particular बहुत cheating करता था. अच्छा, एक मजेदार बात आता हूँ इन आर्टिस्ट के बारे में. ये वो ज़माना था जब प्लेजरिज्म का कोई तस्वर होता ही नहीं था. So all these artists basically honed and developed their skills first and foremost just by copying. They made so many copies of the Greek works that they really, the ability of their hand to recraft what the Greeks were making became phenomenal. Just by making copy after copy after copy after copy after copy. Practice makes perfect. So although they were being plagiarists, but they were also developing their skill because they were plagiarizing with their own hand. So it's quite remarkable. And so humanist architecture, humanist art, etc., that's Da Vinci there, etc. The idea of proportions and proportionality and perfect, dimensions, etc., became very, very strong. So humanism was really the literature of the Renaissance. Humanism, you can say, is the philosophy of the Renaissance. The Renaissance itself is regarded mainly as an art. It was focused on worldly affairs, not on godly or religious affairs. It wanted to stimulate individual creativity. In traditional universities, the subjects that were being taught were theology, law, and medicine. Humanists now began to return to Greek and Roman humanities, grammar, rhetoric, poetry, history, drama, etc. तो जब आप कहते हैं ना, आज आपकी डिपार्टमेंट जिस डिपार्टमेंट के साथ मैं मुंसलिक हूँ, उसका क्या नाम है? Humanities and social sciences. तो social sciences अगर अलग करें, humanities के courses जो हैं, वो सारे ये जो तस्वर है humanities का, ये पूरा तस्वर ही रेनेसांस का. ये जो humanism का तस्वर जो humanities की development हुई, ये सारा तस्वर ही वहाँ से निकला हुआ. Did you know that we were so influenced by this Greek, this Italian phenomena and Greek phenomena? Yes. और उसमें जो सेंट्रल आइडिया था वो ये था कि चलो वो टेक्नोलॉजिकल चीज़ें तो ठीक है, मेडिसिन भी ठीक है, थियोलॉजी भी ठीक है, लॉ भी आपने पढ़ लिया, मगर इंसान की कदरें वैल्यूज क्या होनी चाहिए, ये हमें कहाँ से पता चले? ये आपको पता चलेगा फ्रॉम आर्ट, फ्रॉम लिटरेचर, फ्रॉम पोइट्री। सोशल रिलेशंस हमारे किस तरह के होने चाहिए, हमारे में कंपैशन किस तरह डेवलप हो, ये सब चीज़ें किस तरह डेवलप हो, ये आपको लिटरेचर और आर्ट से मिलेगा। तो अब जब आप ह्यूमैनिटीज़ पढ़ते हैं, आप लैंग्वेजेस पढ़ते हैं, आप लिटरेचर पढ़ते हैं, आप पोइट्री पढ़ते हैं, आप सब चीज़ें पढ़ते हैं, तो ये सब ह्यूमैनिटीज़, ये सारे जो ह्यूमैनिटीज़ का सिलेबस है, ये सारा इन्फ्लुएंस हुआ इस दौर, डेवलप इस दौर के। आप कह सकते हैं कि पहले वाले जो स्कूल थे उनके मदरसे थे, अब मदरसों ने ये कहना शुरू कर दिया कि शादी भी पढ़ाओ, फैज़ भी पढ़ाओ, हबीब जालिब भी पढ़ाओ, अल्लामा इकबाल भी पढ़ाओ। अच्छा, तो I'll start with this guy called Francesco Petrarch, जो कि 14th century में था, पोएट्री था, ह्यूमनिस्ट था। उसने लाइब्रेरी पूरी इकट्ठी की, ग्रीक और रोमन मैन्युस्क्रिप्ट्स की, और उसी के मेहनत के नतीजे में सिसरो और होमर और वर्जिल जैसे ग्रेट पोइट्स और राइटर्स जो हैं वो दोबारा यूरोप में डिस्कवर किए, और डिस्कवर करके उनका आर्ट और लिटरेचर बड़ा, उसमें बड़ी ड्रामेटिक ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन हुई। और मज़ेदार बात ये है कि आप समझते हैं ना कि हमारे स्कूलों में ना, मैंने देखा है कभी आप गवर्नमेंट स्कूल में जाए ना, तो हर तकरीर में ये होता है, एक ये फिक्रा ज़रूर होता है कि जब यूरोप अंधेरे की रोशनी में, डार्क एजेस में था, तो मुसलमान ये तरक्की कर रहे थे, वो तरक्की कर रहे थे। तो जब मैं बचपन में सुनता था, मैं समझता था कि शायद कि हमने उनको लक़ब दिया है कि तुम तो कम वक्त डार्क एजेस में बैठे हुए थे, हम कितनी तरक्की कर रहे थे। अब उलट हो गया वैसे, मगर पता मुझे ये बाद में चला जब मैंने पढ़ना शुरू किया कि सबसे पहले ये तस्वर कि यूरोप जो है ये डार्क एजेस में था, उस दौर में कि जब क्रिश्चियनिटी डोमिनेट कर रही थी डार्क एजेस में। कितनी अजीब सी बात है कि जिस दौर में क्रिश्चियनिटी डोमिनेट कर रही थी, उस दौर में यूरोप जो है डार्क एजेस में चला जाता है। तो ये सबसे पहले तस्वर किसी मुसलमान ने नहीं दिया, किसी इन्फिडेल ने नहीं दिया, ये उन्होंने खुद ही दिया अपने बारे में। उनके ह्यूमनिस्ट राइटर्स ने खुद लिखना शुरू किया, और खास तौर पर पेट्रार्क ने ये लिखा कि जब से रोमन एम्पायर टूटा है, उससे लेके आज तक ये यूरोप की डार्क एजेस है, और हमने इनसे निकलना है, हमने दोबारा से ये सब चीज़ें जो है सीखी। दूसरा बड़ा ग्रेट फिलोसोफर था, उसका नाम था डेसिडेरियस एराज़िमस, जो कि यू कैन सी कि 15th to 16th century में था, और इसका बड़ा इन्फ्लुएंस हुआ एजुकेशन। ही वाज अ डच प्रीस्ट एंड ही इज रियली द मेन राइटर फॉर ह्यूमनिज्म। He wanted the Bible to first of all be translated from Latin into the other vernacular languages like German, English, and French, and so on. And he is a person who said happiness is reached when a person is ready to be what he has. इसने बड़ी famous किताब लिखी, which should be a Lum's classic because really it fits with you guys perfectly, called The Praise of Folly. बेवकूफ़ी की तारीफ में किताब लिखी। He used to not use the Habib Jalib of his time. He used to not satire on corruption and doctrinal wrangling of the church. जिस तरह वो कहता था कि all the ये जो पादरी वगैरह हैं, इनके दरमियान डिस्कशन यही होती रहती है कि how many angels can dance on the pin of a needle. मतलब utterly useless किस्म के questions हैं. Of course they were not actually ever debating that, but he was just making a satire out of it. कहता है folly is a good thing. जहालत बड़ी अच्छी चीज़ है. It brings happiness and contentment. बहुत ज़्यादा knowledge is a dangerous thing. Knowledge can be a burden. It leads to complications and a troublesome life. Religion is also a form of folly. Because faith can never be based on reason, rejecting the mixing of critical rationalism with Christian theology by St. Augustine and St. Thomas Aquinas, he advocated a return to simple, heartfelt beliefs with individuals forming a personal relationship with God. Simplicity, naivety, and humility are the true spirit of the scripture and hold the key to a happy life. So big change caused a big change, and especially with respect to education. It was around this time also, a little later in fact, that another revolution, technological revolution, was sweeping Europe. And this I think is, if you want to look at technologies that change the balance of power between civilizations, I would rate this at the highest level. अगर यूरोप और बाकी दुनिया के अंदर आपने एक टेक्नोलॉजिकल इनोवेशन आइडेंटिफाई करनी कि जिसके नतीजे में यूरोप ने इतनी तरक्की की और हम आप डार्क एजेस में फंसे पड़े हैं, तो वो ये थी। क्या थी कि 1300 में Europeans learned how to make paper. Of course, they learned it from the Arabs, and the Arabs learned it from the Chinese, and they learned to make paper from wood and pulp, etc. and they also learned to make then books with wood blocks, wood में carve करके फिर उसको stamp करते थे. By the 1400s they invented movable type, which meant that in the block they could put little letters and take them out. And by 1455, Gutenberg builds a printing press and prints the first Bible. And by 1500, there are more than 250 Gutenberg printing presses in Europe, churning out books, I should say. This resulted in the rapid dissemination of new ideas. जैसे हारून रशीद ने ट्रांसलेट की किताबें, मगर हारून रशीद के दौर में जब आपने वो किताब खरीदनी होती थी, तो वहाँ एक पूरी सड़क होती थी जहाँ पे एक ऐसा प्रोफेशन था जिनका नाम था वरकीन. क्या नाम? वरकीन क्या करते थे कि वो बैठते थे, दूसरी किताब सामने रखते थे और किताब बैठ कर लिखते थे. तो ये जो आपको फोटोकॉपी में चीज़ें मिल जाती है ना, ऐसा उस ज़माने में नहीं होता था. उस ज़माने में अगर आपको किताब चाहिए होती थी तो पूरी की पूरी किताब हाथ से दोबारा लिखी जाती थी. फिर आप बुक्स वर वेरी एक्सपेंसिव, वेरी रेयर एंड वेरी एक्सपेंसिव. If you had a big library, if you had 100 books, you're like, oh my God, this guy has 100 books. Today I have 100 books on my very phone, not even a problem. But at that time it was a big thing. So the printing, अच्छा, और मुसलमानों में क्या हुआ? जब यूरोप के अंदर ये इजाद हुआ और उन्होंने चीज़ें छापनी शुरू कर दी, छापा सिस्टम शुरू कर दिया, तो मुसलमानों में क्या हुआ कि मुसलमानों ने ये कहा कि नहीं, हम तो प्राइमरीली कुरान मजीद और रिलीजियस लिटरेचर छापते हैं, तो रिलीजियस लिटरेचर के लिए एक सफाई चाहिए, एक नफासत चाहिए. बल्कि वराकीन जो हुआ करते थे वो पहले वुज़ू करते थे और वुज़ू करके वो बैठ के फिर वो कुरान मजीद को कॉपी करते थे या हदीस लिखते थे या फ़िक़्ह वगैरह जो भी किताबें वगैरह थी, वुज़ू करके बैठ के लिखते थे. तो इट यूज्ड टू टेक अ लॉन्ग टाइम. तो वो कहते थे कि हरगिज़ नहीं, हम अपना कुरान जो है मुकद्दस वो प्रिंटिंग प्रेस से निकालेंगे. कभी आपने प्रिंटिंग प्रेस देखी किसी ने जाके? नहीं कि कभी देखा है कि एरिया जहाँ प्रिंटिंग हो रही हो या कुछ, उर्दू बाजार चले जाओ, प्रिंटिंग प्रेस देखो, हर जगह जो है ना वो इंक लगी होती है. आई मीन इट्स अ मेसी प्रोसेस. जो प्रिंटर्स भी होते हैं उनके भी हाथ पे और कपड़ों पे इंक लगी होती है वगैरह वगैरह. इट्स अ मेसी प्रोसेस. दिस इज टू मेसी एंड इट्स नॉट क्लीन एंड वी डोंट वांट दिस. फॉर 300 years the Ottomans banned the printing press, did not take advantage of this new technology, and the result of course was for 300 years the Europeans kept printing and printing and printing, and this led to a great opening of minds. Finally Machiavelli जो आज का टॉपिक था, 5 मिनट ब्रेक लेने या चल जारी है? हाँ वही कि जारी रखें. जो जारी रहना चाहते हैं बैठ जाए, बाकी 5 मिनट ब्रेक लेते हैं.